So, nonetheless, and because we're a little bit on fast forward and the nature of our encounter is on a timer, I sometimes slalom between incompatible zones. And I urge you again to use me as a television, pause me, mute me, ask for subtitles when you need it, when it suddenly goes foreign on you. Ask for explanations, because I am somehow, in the rights of nerves sense, pushed and persecuted by the need to quickly tell you everything that I know, and quickly accelerate the pedagogical instant with you. This is a problem, this acceleration, and I don't know if it's my sense of pressure. I mean, if we had time and if we had the place for it, I would spend, and I have, a year on one sentence. A year. That's my, if it's a sentence, I don't think I finished the sentence in a year. But I don't think one can proceed slowly enough, and it's actually political and an engagement to pull the emergency brake and slow it down. Because we're in a fast food, accelerated, technologically rapid, let's say under that kind of gun and imperative. So anxiety, according to Freud, which he sets up over and against initially, fear. So what's the difference between fear and anxiety? Does anyone know the classic? Yes?
I think fear is a determinate category.
Mm-hmm.
Has a beginning and an end.
Are you Richard?
Yes.
Okay. And is it okay if I call you by your first name?
Sure.
Thank you.
It has a beginning and an end, but anxiety doesn't have that. It's kind of free-floating.
So fear has an object. It's determinate. You know exactly what you're afraid of. It is linked to an object or an event or an episode or something that you know you're afraid of. Whereas anxiety, as Richard said, is free-floating, which is to say it does not have an object. It's objectless. So Kierkegaard might talk about the anxiety of freedom. You're suddenly given freedom, and you don't know what to do with it. You might be like a little bird that's released from a cage, and it might do one lap and then come right back and just sit on that perch, you know. So the anxiety of freedom is something that arguably takes up objectless dimensions. Like you don't know why you're anxious. This would be the classical starting point before you then question those distinctions. So let's stay with that. Now, the rights of nerves means that you are prompted to do what you do, perhaps out of disgust, out of outrage, out of fear, or driven by anxiety. You don't know why. You're compelled or impelled toward an object or a project or a thing or an unthing, a non-thing. And when I began to think about the greeting, to get back to the hello, the initiatory and inaugural moment of our encounter, I mean, we can imagine how many different types of openings one could have had. Well, when did our encounter begin? Maybe yesterday. However, or maybe before. But here, could you imagine something opening without a greeting? It's possible. I could have come in and taken the position that Lacan calls the sujet supposé savoir, which is to say that of the subject supposed to know. Have you discussed that and worked on that? So the teaching, one of our registers, I like to work on at least 6 registers, so buckle your seatbelts. And I'm reading, each register reads the other. Like one of them will be pedagogy. And I've tried to develop a notion of edipedagogy, so the transferential implications and impositions of any pedagogy, and I will get to that momentarily, including the rapid transferential turnover that you experience here at EGS, because you go from one sujet supposé savoir to the next. And let's always also, in addition to reading our text, consider us a text, and what we do here, what we inscribe or even exscribe here, or any exclusionary operations, what will not happen here or what cannot happen here. Let's imagine that there's all sorts of contractual impingements on us. We're already legally bound to each other in certain ways. The law is very active in our encounter. What are some of the rules or laws or preconditions of our even being here? Do you have, do you want to start enumerating that? What is it? Because the fact that we are here, too, shouldn't be taken for granted, nor should it be thought of as some spontaneous, nebulous, objectless thing that happened, but without all sorts of legal, contractual impingements and consensus among us. This can be very banal and minimal. Do you have a sense of what are some of the contractual presuppositions for our encounter here?
Well, we have to show up. I mean, we have to.
Right, you have to show up. Your name is Candida.
Yes, Candida.
Show up on time, right? Okay, so that's already the law of our encounter. Something like the metaphysics of presence that regulates the possibility of a pedagogical encounter, even though things will have been also relayed and deferred and dispatched to online stuff, mediated forms of reading and so on before our encounter. So you do have to show up on time. That's a rule. So you're already under an injunction or an imperative. What else makes it possible for us to even be sitting here and talking?
The previous contracts that we've had with airline companies, so on and so forth.
Exactly. All sorts of, you've signed all sorts of leases. You've put out money. Does anyone want to say that?
Well, you had to apply. I mean, you had to make a decision to apply.
Right. You've all decided to be dressed.
Yes.
You don't have an objection coming from me, but not only did you decide to be dressed, don't be cute and come up naked tomorrow. Because she said that would be a violation or breach of an implicit tacit contract. Also, you've all decided to adhere to a certain semiotic regulatory phase. No one's in a tie and jacket. No one looks like a... That used to happen in Berkeley when the FBI would check in on you. You suddenly have a student in a tie and jacket. You know? So that, did you have that when you were there? Someone?
I often had students in ties and jackets surrounding me, yes.
So there's already a semiotic rule, and for some reason no one would break that rule, even though you must think that you have semiotically made choices, and to a certain degree you may have, but you've also been constrained by certain contractual expectations of how you would dress, and without too much range of aberration and so on. So there's all sorts of rules, and the imposition of law that we do want to be aware of. This isn't as free as it might be, even though institutionally EGS prides itself on a certain kind of freedom. As we saw last night too, Wolfgang even said that he would kill anyone who squatted. So that's the law speaking in a certain way. Now to get back, though in Kafka the law speaks differently. The law speaks differently in Kafka. The law says, go ahead, be my guest. Do what, you're free, I give you a free hand, which means I give you a free hand to mess up, and then I'll get you. So the law in Kafka, and that's one of the things that we'll be working on. Some of you were present when Judith Butler and I and Larry Rickles gave a class on Kafka and Benjamin, but I wanted to show how the law isn't, in Kafka, is much more, perhaps in the end, pernicious, because it's not merely abusive. The law says, sure, like the mafia sometimes, is shown to say, sure, go ahead, do this. And so there's a kind of judgment looming and dooming over the subject. This is something we're going to look at much more closely. I know I'm too quickly opening dossiers for us to consider, but I will get back to each theme and motif and topos, and if I don't, bring me back to it. So I began by saying something about the sujet supposé savoir. That is the subject installed by Lacan, who's in a position, a functional position, and who is supposed, or one presumes, and makes the assumption that this subject knows or retains knowledge, even vital and secret knowledge that you want. That subject is just functionally established. So whoever would have come, and one of the laws of our encounter, have you noticed, is that I get to talk and you get to note and heed and either agree or perhaps in one rare case disagree or engage. But there's and also look at the architectural design that allows me to be centered, and the centering isn't innocent or neutral. Not at all. It's part of a phallogocentric determination that the subject supposed to know, or about whom it's supposed that they hold the knowledge that you want, is, according to Lacan, and of course he's talking most explicitly about the analyst who sits there as a tower of knowledge that mostly withholds what she or it or he knows, but toward which all sorts of transferential energy is directed, and the drama of identification begins to build up. What I didn't say last night was that all politics for Freud is organized around identification with the other. And the problem for Freud is how narcissism can break off, how people can be less self-involved in order to even see the other. And to what extent is any even politically satisfying and laudatory act still stuck in the bell jar of narcissistic nurturance? In other words, the problem is, can we even identify with the other? What about identification? And so on and so forth. But what I also began to talk about is the rapid transferential turnover to which you are all subjected by going from one sujet supposé savoir, one subject supposed to know, to the next one. And what happens then? I'm asking only that we read our class, we read where we are, we think about and reflect on what makes enunciation possible, what has already set it up, what has prohibited it, what are the preconditions, what are the disastrous blockages. I want us to make that part of our thinking of this pedagogical encounter. So if something, let's say, threatens to capsize in some way, or you're distressed, or we're moving too fast, or you don't understand, or there's something that you heartfully disagree with or can't assimilate, instead of alienating that from your experience of the pedagogy, I urge you to consider it as part of our thinking together. Put it into the textual mix and note where it resists. That'll be a psychoanalytic and philosophical question that I urge you to stay near throughout our encounter. Where does it resist? Try to be aware of that. Now, I'm not inviting resistance. I rather like psychotic adherence and the transferential swell of appreciation, admiration, and love. However, even Freud said that a little resistance is necessary. A little, please note little. Resistance is necessary if traction is to take place. So all of Freud's analysons come in and are coached by him and then produce effects of resistance. So there's very likely a way for us to install a double reading practice here, which is to read the works together, to form an intention. Let us form an intention together. What is it we want to do and accomplish together? I take nothing for granted. I could also give now a lecture on what it is to take for granted. So to form an intention, but to read together, but also to read ourselves reading. In other words, to make to open the screen or split the screen, whatever works for you, to an attentiveness to the way we are, or I am, or you are individually, or she is, or he is, reading or not reading, or aberrating from something, and to be very attentive to that kind of disjunctive and jolting movement as well. That, in a way, will help you integrate the work we're doing here, and also to ask about what non-comprehension is, if that should occur. It rarely occurs, but if you don't understand, is it a refusal of some sort? Instead of getting too worried, because you can bring that up here. We're friends, right? You can bring that up here if you're not understanding something. But let's say that there's a moment of non-understanding that sticks in some way that can't be articulated. Ask yourselves very calmly what this experience of non-understanding might be. Is it a resistance? Is it a traumatic blockage? What's going on? So I want us to read ourselves reading relentlessly, and also to attend to the work at hand, if it's ever at hand. So that's why I started with asking you about the greeting, about how we open with the enunciation, hello, grüezi, in this village here, is what they say. And I began to talk about the rights of nerves as a prod and a legitimator, even, for the way you might relate to your work, or working projects, or work in progress. So my relation to the greeting, that, by the way, does it disturb you when I move in and out of anecdotal cognitive zones. I can be very professorial, but here I try to do something a little different without compromising the professorial behavior that's expected, I think, as well. The way that I started thinking about the greeting was, as very often, by means of a negative pull, a drag on my life. I noticed that some people, or I have the habit of greeting everyone, and I thought this isn't politically correct. I thought I must look retarded. Then I go, hi, you know, what's that about? What?
I do that too.
You do that too, good. You're coming out with me. So you greet people. So this is an anthropological moment. I mean, Kant writes the critiques and the anthropology. So let me go into the anthropology and diary on the margins of the critique of reason, pure reason or something like that. So I noticed, first of all, my own compulsion to greet the other. What's that about? But of course, what I notice is when people don't say hello back. Mm-hmm. And the wounding effect that it has on the sensitive part of me. And then I noticed sometimes people, I mean, I explained the inverse of this when I ducked into the ladies' room in order to not greet Lyotard. I've been greeting him ever since. I even noticed people crossing the street when they see me coming down. So once I grabbed someone, I collared someone. I said, I need to know, you're talking to a sensitive, paranoid person, so this is not a personal assault. This is not a shakedown, this is not a power play. This is a need-to-know situation. Can you tell me why you avoided me in order to avoid greeting me or receiving my greeting? And the person said, of course, this had been going on for years, and I finally needed to know. In the meantime, I had started writing about the greeting and finding out that for Heidegger, it's absolutely essential, and for Hannah Arendt too, that you call the other into existence, into being, by greeting them. You say, I want you to be. That's a translation of the greeting. I recognize that you are here, without offering recognition necessarily, without the heavy pomposity of a Hegelian scene of recognition where then you duke it out and beat the shit out of each other to see who's on top in the recognition game. Okay, that's a very fast-tracked reading of the Herr-Knecht dialectic, or the, what's it called, master-slave dialectic. So I collared the person. I said, need to know, it's not about you, it's about me. Why do you avoid greeting me? And he said, very, very simply, Avital, because I owe you a paper. Who knew? Who knew? It was his guilt that he didn't want to confront me, and I didn't even remember. I said, really? He said, yeah, 4 years ago, you cut me a deal and gave me a break and said, you give me, don't tell anyone, but you give me a grade, and I would owe you a paper. And that situation has weighed on me. And then I said, well, do you want to work this through with me a little bit? Because I had to have fuel up on coffee anyway at that moment. So we had some coffee, and it turned out that my offering the gift of a delay or a deferral or a deal actually was a curse for this person and was too heavy to carry. If I had said, no, your paper's due tomorrow, I don't care, don't give me your, grandmother, your dog ate it, whatever, it's tomorrow, that person would have been much more free and free to receive a greeting and to offer a greeting than had I, in this maybe faux generosity, cut some deal that broke the rules and violated institutional protocol, which did no one a favor. So, in any case, it turned out that a lot of the refusals to greet were motivated in very banal but readable ways. Nonetheless, I had gone by my Rights to Nerves banner, following my banner and my need to start thinking about what the greeting is, what constitutes a greeting, what does the withholding of a greeting imply. I also noticed sociologically, and I may be wrong even to bring this up, and having gone through the work called the test drive, I offer it as a hypothesis that you can shoot down because it's still a shaky hypothesis. But I have noticed that people of color and people in social and financial distress tend to be more greetingly approachable than people who are socially more, at least outwardly stable. If you say hello to an African American, okay, there are many modalities of hello and places and situations. You will get the warmest greeting in return. If you, I mean, this is, I practiced this kind of Adorno-like sociological probe. It may be full of holes and difficult articulation, so it's not for publication. I just bring it up as a very tentative hypothesis. In other words, who responds or who thinks that they have the civic stability to refuse a greeting? Who's powerful enough to just set you aside and continue on their walk? And which cultures, for example, when you take a walk in France and you say hello to someone on the way, you're actually disturbing them. Like, what is this? Hi, hi, hello, hello. It's an American neurosis. Leave them alone. They don't know you, they don't want to know you. Let them have their walk or whatever they're doing. But when you walk down a path in an American zone of hiking or anything, everyone says hello to everyone. And indeed, that could be a disruption, an intrusion, a violation. So we're also thinking, one of our registers is to continue to think about what Judith Butler was saying in terms of adjacency, of nearness and farness to the other. And the greeting has a long range and history. So the rights of nerves was that I was pissed off and resentful and non-Nietzschean. You know, Nietzsche taught me, I thought, to be noble, to let go of and release resentimental kind of attachment or rage. Nietzsche discovered the trope of resentment as the motor of history. And that I can explain when you need to have it explained. In any case, the modalities that greeting goes through should be relatively open to you. What's the word for greeting in French or Spanish? Exactly. So we're in the realm of the salute. It can be an army salute even, a salute to the other. I bow, this is a Levinasian moment too, I bow to the other. In the moment of greeting, I bow before the other. The greeting as Celan, the great poet, Celan, Paul Celan, so we're still with Paul, as written up by Levinas. Celan said that the poem is the handshake of the greeting. So I try to go slow-mo on that movement of the handshake, reaching out to the other. We didn't even talk about the corporeal punctuation of the greeting. There's the American hug, the Russian bear hug, there's the kiss, 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 3 times in Switzerland, kiss, kiss. So how does the greeting get marked? is another question. On the face, on the hand, nowadays like this, if you don't want to get too much bacterial acculturation with your friends. So the salute to the other is an honoring. It's a bowing before the other, and it can be, as when I went on on a bear, we met, I went to work with a trekker, I forgot what they're called suddenly, but we ran into a bear, and the way he handled, a real grizzly, the way he handled is he saluted the bear. There was a little group and we were scared shitless, but our tracker bent before the bear and said, okay, I'm not going to complain because it worked, I bow before your ancestors. And we're like all bowing, going, what the fuck, you know? Why don't we just put our heads in its mouth and get it over with? So we were there in submissive pose, as you are to be even when you greet a dog for the first time, right? You're to go like this, to not, hi dog, or you'll get, it's like, you know, you submit. Let me just, so the bear, that was a long moment when we were all following our leader and bowing before the bear and greeting its ancestors, and I'm thinking, well, that's the limit to New Age, isn't it? You know, when you end up, or whatever it was, you end up being eaten by a grizzly, as in Herzog's film. So, and I had seen the film, and I'm like, oh, shit, what was I thinking? You know, this was part of my prep for an event with Werner Herzog in Paris. So I thought, I should do what actors and other real people do. They actually have an experience. And then I'm like, you fucking idiot. You know, and who needed this? The film was enough. It was grizzly enough and all that. So the bear looked at us, considered us, and we don't know. Was I thinking? What is called thinking? Did the bear think it over or what? But the bear accepted our submissiveness and just found us boring and turned around, thank you, all the gods, and was not interested in us. So there's a greeting when I say before the other. It isn't, or the greeting that Levinas narrates. Are you familiar with Levinas's story about when he was in a camp? He was in a camp, concentration camp, not a death camp, but a worker camp in this case. And he describes how he was dehumanized every day, and the German guards would call them dogs and dehumanize them, and they'd go to work and then they'd come back to their fenced-in camp, and it was just, they thought they weren't going to make it. It was so exhausting and destructive of their very being. Then there was suddenly a stray dog who showed up, and they called this dog by the exotic name of Bobby. If we had time, we would want to know why Bobby is exotic, maybe because it's an American name, maybe. And where did this dog come from? What is it a messenger of? And Levinas writes that henceforth, every time that they would return from their dehumanizing and debilitating labor, Bobby would come running up to them and greet them. And that's what rehumanized them. So it's the dog, they were called dogs, Schweinhunde, and by humans, so-called humans, and it was the dog that brought the greeting and brought them into existence again. So that greeting can come from anywhere. According to Heidegger's reading of Hölderlin, the poet is exemplarily capacitated to relay the greeting. In order to greet, says Heidegger reading Andenken or Remembrance, you have to have been greeted. You don't originate the greeting, but the greeting already comes to you. You have been greeted. You have been welcomed. And this is something I'm working up also to Friday's meeting with Anne Dufourmantelle on hospitality. You will have been originarily welcomed so that you can greet. So to offer a greeting, now he's reading one line in Hölderlin, Geh nun und grüße. So now you must go and greet. So a wind or the gods give the poet her or his assignment and say, go and greet. So Heidegger frames this and says, why does Hölderlin have the poet's essential task marked as the act, if it is an act, or the passivity? What is it to greet? Is it an act? Is it opening yourself up to the other? Is it rendering yourself very passive? So the poet is exemplarily endowed with the assignment and possibility of greeting, of offering a greeting. And then if you read Hannah Arendt and others, not others, but Heidegger, about what this greeting could mean and what it conveys, because the greeting doesn't ask anything of you. When you're greeted, there's no demand placed on you. There's no obligation. It is a kind of responsibility, maybe, but it's a bowing down before the other when you offer the greeting without asking anything of the other. You're not even necessarily saying, as you know, the comic aspects of asking someone, how are you doing? What's up? And then they start telling you catastrophe. You know, that's not what you meant. You just meant, may you exist, may you be brought. No, you may not have thought you meant that, but that's what you mean when you say hello or so. But maybe in the pathological case that I presented with my own anecdote, what was it that I needed? That's a problem. That is a problem. There shouldn't be an expression or a trace of need or a demand for recognition. When you greet the other, you don't necessarily want to know or ask to know anything about them. There's a kind of level of the gift of granting. When I say we take nothing for granted, what does granting mean? It means that you're just granting that the other exists. You might want them to exist. That's what Hannah Arendt says. When I greet you, I'm saying, may you exist. May you be brought into this world. May you be part. I want you to be. That's what she says. I want you to be. That's what the greeting is. Yeah, let's continue to think of the difficulties of what it is that is done, performed, given, and withheld. I'm just starting minimally, slow-mo, performing the level of interrogation that I hope that we can sustain and endure here by not even taking for granted that we opened our encounter today with a hello. Now, the greeting can also modulate to pernicious forms of greeting. It can also, as you may remember or know, bombs when the Gulf War started and there were bombs. The soldiers wrote messages, greetings to Saddam, as they called him, Saddam. And these were postcards, these were missives and missiles that were considered greetings, like fuck you is a greeting too, right? That can be a greeting. So I don't want it to be all have a nice day kind of, I want you to be, because wanting you to be is also almost sending a lifeline to the other. It's very heavy, if I can say it too quickly. So, but it's also, there are always, and this is what we're going to switch on now, which is the Nietzschean transvaluation machine, which is to say we're going to look at almost everything from at least two valences. In other words, Nietzsche can say there's a good decadence and there's a bad decadence. Let me give you an example. For Nietzsche, there's a good homelessness and a bad homelessness. You all, alas, know what a bad homelessness is, when people are bereft and destitute and just stuck in horrible and unacceptable conditions. But what's the good homelessness? In Nietzsche, it's the nomadic. It's what Deleuze and Guattari run with. Okay, the more free-spirited, nomadic, unrooted being that can go anywhere, do anything, and live dangerously, as Nietzsche exhorts at a certain point. So that was meant as an example of the Nietzschean transvaluation machinery, which is to say, he looks at things in terms of their good values and their pernicious values, and we're going to try to do that together. So there's the good greeting, to say too quickly, and then the bad greeting can go from the high to the Heil, because Sieg Heil and putting your arm up is also a greeting, right? It says all sorts of things. So there's the salute. We're still reading the salute, which is also a pernicious military salute. And it's the salute of triumphalism and domination. Not at all, I bow before the other, but the salute of, look what's coming down the pike, get out of the way. Yes, was there a remark or a question?
Oh,
Yes.
it's kind of along these lines.
Right.
Yeah, I'm aware of my cynicism when I'm in the grocery line, and I get to the counter and I'm asked how my day was, and I sense that the question is out of obligation, or in the Starbucks culture where they are required to give a more than just kind of a hi, how are you, but they have to ask more in the way of greeting.
Yeah, absolutely, and that would be something to consider as well, the coerced greeting. At the same time, when you've been to other countries where you stand in front of the post office guichet or functionary, and they pretend you don't exist, the American overkill of hi, my name is Sally, and I'll be your waitress, and how are you today? I agree, you're ready to, counter-greet, but it may be some sort of relief. Obviously, you're absolutely right. The question would be, philosophically, what necessitated that artificial insemination of the greeting into the business world? Is it covering up? Is it masking really predatory behaviors and expectations? Or you've seen this in many banks when they're closing you down or foreclosing you. There's always in an American encounter a big smile. We see this also in one of the Herzog films where someone's about to be evicted and they're just discovering America. And the banker, they can't read this because the banker's so friendly and smiling as he's telling them that they didn't pay their mortgage, they're out of here, So there's this friendliness. So there's friendly fire, there's friendliness and friendliness. That's something to consider. Now, the salut is also a question of health and redemption. So this is part of a whole redemptive thought, that you're also being redeemed in some way. So there's a theological overlay as well that you might consider. When I salute you in French or German or and Spanish and other languages, there's also a connection to the possible redemption of the other. I just want you to consider all of these possibilities and implications of the greeting so that we can continue and start our encounter. The second part of something that we won't take for granted is where we find ourselves. This is very important in all sorts of discursive negotiations, is where are you speaking from? Who's speaking from where? From what institutional or other space? What geopolitical zoning ordinance has placed you in this or that position? Again, the sujet supposé savoir is the one who's structurally in a place of knowledge, which doesn't mean that that subject is filled with or capable of offering power and knowledge, but that is kind of projected onto that functional space. So where do we find ourselves? So let's just calm down and ask where we are here, because I don't know if you've thought about this, where we are in this landscape, that this is the mountains, or close to the mountains, in the neighborhood of the mountains that Nietzsche treaded, right, Sils Maria. This is close to where Rousseau was floating around in the famous Fifth Reverie of the solitary walker. So there's also, wherever you're speaking from or pedagogically landed, there's a relation to the masters and ghosts who continue to leave their signature and imprints on the place, and we should always summon those masters and ghosts to join us and help us think. This is where Adorno expired. So it's not only a question of who else was here, but also of what constitutes historically and aesthetically this landscape. Where are we as we try to talk to each other and think together?